There are few more irritating holding patterns than remaking old video games. Wasn't always the case, since I was bright-eyed and optimistic once under the impression that every game needs to be remade and shown to a new audience who clearly care enough to buy into this pocket of history, but the reality is a lot more sobering. We have plenty of proof to say that not every remake is doomed from the start, but I don't like the idea of any developer relying on nostalgia to make money. We've already got Disney over here sterilising classic animated films through live action with a filter of cheap CGI. I'd like it if games developers didn't fall into the same trap. But who am I to stand in the way of money? So, much like your deepest, darkest nightmares, an unnecessary remake can take many different forms. Highly subjective, since we all have our own ideas of what unnecessary looks like, but my definition typically follows a straightforward set of criteria consisting of remakes that come out too close to the original's release year, and remakes of games that have already been remade, and hey, just remakes of games that aren't all that good, and also the remake isn't much better. You need a special set of circumstances for a game to be exciting enough for a potential remake, and that does not happen as often as remakes are released these days. It's a pandemic and it needs to stop. We're starting to get on top of that other one, so maybe there's an opening. It seems a bit drastic to say that any game is unnecessary, since there are so many others out there that I don't really have to care too much about some random errant remakes that didn't really need to exist, but it does irk me a bit because there are so many other games out there that will be far worthier of a remake than some of the crap in this video. Although remember, a game being on this video isn't an automatic declaration that it's a terrible game, it's just, the remake is a bit unnecessary. You'll catch on eventually. Remakes are the perfect opportunity to peel the curtain back on decades of classic games. When it comes to choosing which games need revisiting on a modern console, there are entire franchises that have never been touched that current audiences would probably really enjoy if it was a bit easier to get hold of them. Remakes generally follow the same rules of only ever happening to great, or at the very least decent games, since it's probably a good idea to tackle a project that doesn't require you to move mountains to get it into a respectable state. All the pet projects in the world can't prepare you for a world where Night Trap randomly becomes relevant in the 21st century. I thought we left that back in the 90s along with disposable cameras. It's possible that you know Night Trap for one of a few different reasons. Maybe you played the original back on the Sega CD because you didn't have many other options. Maybe you know of it as having a very important role to play in getting the age rating for lots of video games. Maybe you played Five Nights at Freddy and really wanted a shitty B-movie version of that. But it doesn't really matter how you came across it, as long as you now accept that, it just ain't all that great. At least Mortal Kombat was worth the age rating fight. Always seemed a bit strange to me that the 1993 congressional hearings went in hard on Night Trap for its apparent sexual violence, despite it not being all that great a video game. Feels a bit like kicking them while they're down, which seems like overkill on such a weird game. Like, damn Night Trap, why are you so weird and creepy? Why are there so many gimp-suited bad guys running around? What is happening to this young woman? Why did this game get remade? There are so many questions related to this game, but I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that Night Trap is one of the last games that should ever get a remake. It was weird and controversial in the 90s, and while the controversies have cooled and people have gotten over themselves, reintroducing the world to Night Trap doesn't have the allure that you'd think. I mean, I care a bit, since it's the perfect way to introduce a new generation to this relatively obscure corner of gaming history, but Night Trap has not aged well at all, and I didn't need a remake to tell me that. Although its Nintendo Switch release did bring up a fun bit of ironic history, since the former president of Nintendo of America, Howard Lincoln, stated during those congressional hearings that Night Trap would never appear on a Nintendo system. Maybe we should listen to history a bit more often. Remakes have a very specific purpose. Yes, it's a chance to bring this game into the modern day for a younger demographic who didn't get a chance the first time around, but you would be a fool to not use this opportunity to fix problems present in the original and slowly claw your way towards some kind of perfect video game. Although, that does imply that you might need a few goes to get it right, and the idea of remaking a remake is fucking insane. It's a curious thought, isn't it? The idea of a remake getting a remake, or a remaster getting remastered, but I suppose if the game is iconic enough, then it is at least somewhat justified. In fact, if you're making significant enough changes from one remake to the next, then you're on the right track, which I reckon is probably the case with the original Resident Evil and kind of the first generation of Pokemon as well. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee are a bit shaky conceptually, but at least they justify their existence by being so different to the previous versions of Gen 1. In 2018, Shadow of the Colossus became the latest member of a select group of games to be double remaked, or in the case here, a remaster of the original PS2 game that was already remastered when it was turned into a PS3 game. The difference is that the PS3 version came boxed with IKEA as well, so Bluepoint Games were at least justifying themselves with that remake. Recently though, not so much. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with Shadow of the Colossus being on the PS4 since it's still an incredible game, and if the PS4 can't handle backwards compatibility then this will do just fine. It's hardly a wasted remake either, because Bluepoint had to make all of the game's assets again from the ground up, and it's comfortably the definitive version of Shadow of the Colossus, but so was the PS3 version. Feels a bit redundant to remake a game that had already reached some level of perfection 7 years prior, and I'm left wondering if Bluepoint will pull something similar with the PS5. Probably not, since the PS5 is supposed to be backwards compatible, but maybe I'll have to remake this video in a few years when we get the inevitable third Shadow of the Colossus remake. And if that video feels pointless and unnecessary, you'll understand exactly why this current video needs to be made. Work that one out when you have the time. The release of the Nintendo Switch was a massive event for the gaming industry. It breathed new life into Nintendo's stuttering contributions to gaming hardware, and suddenly gave developers an entertaining challenge to squeeze console games onto this unusual blend of console and handheld gaming. A task taken up by a number of experienced developers and handled really well for the most part. You know, for every The Witcher 3 somehow running really well on a couple of circuit boards, we have ports like WWE 2K18 that scarcely resemble a video game that you'd actually pay money for. Anytime I want a game remade, I always think that the Switch would be a great destination for it. Do you know what console isn't such a great place for remakes these days? How about the 3DS, which is 9 years old this year and is hanging onto its existence by a thread, and is just crying out for retirement on Nintendo's public admission that it's a dead console that is no longer being supported? Yeah, this is where Luigi's Mansion wound up in 2018. What a fucking waste. Moving a GameCube launch title onto the 3DS becomes a more complicated task than merely porting it over. Part of the reason why the Switch is so attractive for developers is that it's significantly easier to develop for than the 3DS, and putting the original Luigi's Mansion onto a touchscreen handheld is a tricky task to say the least. Definitely a fun technical exercise, but if you were looking for any kind of impressive sales figures from all of this, then you have no idea what you're doing. Considering that the Switch came out almost exactly a year before this, you can't help but wonder why Nintendo and Grezzo couldn't wait a little longer and give Luigi's Finest Outing a more substantial remake that people would actually end up buying. Nintendo have been winding down production of the 3DS over the past couple of years, so the idea of a new game being released on this waning system is really weird, let alone a long-awaited remake of an important GameCube game. The irony is that Luigi's Mansion is a very necessary remake, but not for a handheld that is close to a complete shutdown of production. I'll miss the 3DS and mourn the day it officially dies, but we've got the Switch and Switch Lite now, we kinda don't need it anymore. Could always use more Luigi's Mansion though. The last time I talked negatively about remakes, I did so with the aim of discussing the flat-out worst remakes. There's a decent amount of overlap between unnecessary remakes and terrible ones, but something like Super Mario 64 DS manages to be both really necessary and really annoying to control, so it's a fine balance finding a remake that satisfies both criteria. Luckily, Microsoft bought Rareware with the specific aim of giving me a shitty, unnecessary remake to talk about, so I'd be letting them down if I didn't use this golden opportunity to take 100% justified shots at Conker Live and Reloaded. It's not often that a remake's conceptual design helps to contribute to its overall quality or subsequent lack of it and helps to designate it as an ultimately unnecessary remake, but Microsoft went big in 2005 with just the worst thing imaginable. I haven't been able to tick so many boxes in a long time. Microsoft's acquisition of Rare in 2002 was a big event, and one that didn't immediately need to show results, but, you know, if there's some kind of wave of positivity emanating out from everyone involved that this is a good idea and definitely not a massive waste of money, and I completely understand that, but what I struggle with quite a lot is the idea of a Conker's Bad Fur Day remake just 4 years after the original came out. I mean, what's the fucking point of that? I suppose that's one thing that the first 60 seconds of this video and Conker Live and Reloaded have in common, because in order to warrant its own existence as a knee-jerk remake and much more than a graphical overhaul, they took all the swearing out! What the fuck you doing, Microsoft? Bad language isn't one of the cornerstones of Conker's Bad Fur Day, but it does work nicely with the cartoony art style to create gallons of delicious irony, as this Banjo-Kazooie looking game has its protagonist get lit and swear his troubles away. Live and Reloaded was handled in a shockingly similar way to Disney's recent live-action film remakes, where designs were upheaved without any consideration of what they would do to the overall tone, and other changes feel more like apologies for decisions made with the original. Like, the Great Mighty Pooh goes from being this larger-than-life boss fight that swears you out and chucks shit at you, to being this damp squib with a ton of censoring and the only thing being thrown at you being reminders that if you're enjoying this video and want to see more, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications of every new video. I know I said it earlier, but the big reason why Live and Reloaded feels unnecessary most of all is that it came out just 4 years after Conker's Bad Fur Day. And I know we've had GTA 5 and The Last of Us tweaking themselves so they can span 2 console generations, but this remake is quite the departure from the first game. It's trying very hard to make itself feel like it belongs, but it fails so hard. Someone out there at Microsoft looked up Conker's Bad Fur Day and said, "Nah, do it our way." Your way fucking sucks, man. I like to pride myself on bringing everything together at the end of a video. It's like a closing statement in a video essay that says something like, and that's why the title of this video is the way it is, because it's good to touch base on what you're supposed to be talking about. Unnecessary remakes are a decent problem to have because too many games being remade may offer hope that your favourite game will get the renovations that it deserves at some point, but it really does depend on when and where the remake happens. Luigi's Mansion needed a remake, but I don't think putting it on the 3DS was the best move, and as it so happens, it is not the last Mario game to make that mistake. I say last because Mario & Luigi's Bowser's Inside Story got a remake on the 3DS that came out even closer to the end of the handheld lifespan, and I don't need to tell you how that worked out for sales. It just didn't. If Luigi's Mansion was a terrible idea, this is just baffling to me. Bowser's Inside Story on the 3DS with its little Bowser Jr. expansion subplot is the prime example of how timing can affect a game's reception and sales figures. In fact, if this game was released on the Switch as it is, with a few tweaks to de-emphasize the touchscreen and with any dual screen shenanigans condensed onto a single screen somehow, I think a lot of people would have seen it as a pretty awesome idea and gone out and bought it. As it is, Bowser's Inside Story got a remake on the 3DS, a console that can already play the original DS game. Like, what the fuck? At a time when the 3DS was hanging onto its life by its fingertips while the Switch was nearly 2 years old, and clearly what Nintendo are focused on moving forward. It's a suicidal move, and one that sold so badly that it's likely the major contributing factor behind developer Alpha Dream's bankruptcy last year. You know, the same Alpha Dream who made every other game in the Mario & Luigi series, including some of the best games on their respective systems. Those guys even made a similar kind of remake with Superstar Saga, which made more sense since that's a GBA game, but even that didn't sell all that well in 2017. When you're bumping elbows for sales figures with Virtual Boy Mario games, you know you're in trouble. Can't imagine how you ever expected this to pan out. This RabbidLuigi and Bowser's Inside Story can hopefully highlight the financial risks that some remakes are, because if fans aren't actively clamouring for a remake, you have no idea how successful it will be or if anyone will buy it. Bowser's Inside Story for the DS is the best-selling Mario & Luigi game in the entire series, but the remake is one of the worst-selling Mario games of all time, so you really do have to be so careful. I remember seeing it announced and just thinking to myself, wow, I have never been less excited for a game in my entire life. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Slightly different outro this week because some of you might be aware that YouTube has removed the option of integrated polls in a video for some fucking reason. I don't know why. You know, I was watching people who use the polls in their videos, so, you know, YouTube doing YouTube. And I just want to say that I'm going to continue doing the user-suggested topic voting thing. I'm just not sure what I'm going to do with it, because I've been doing this for long enough that YouTube polls weren't actually a thing when I started, and I was using straw poll on Twitter, so I might go back to that for at least a little while until I can come up with a more interesting solution to that. Either way, I recommend you go to my Twitter, because I'm probably going to have some kind of poll there to decide the topic of next week's video, but long term, I'm going to keep my options open and see what I can do. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.